What is real? What is reality? Are you real? Am I? Is the world we live in a fabrication, an illusion? Can we ever really know? I hope you're comfortable in your reality, if you can even call it that. Number 1. About 5 years ago, my friend and I were leaving Newton Falls, Ohio, after the 4th of July fireworks. We headed towards Akron, which was about 45 minutes away. A short bit outside of town, we passed state troopers in an area and a motorcycle on its side, with a body covered. There was suddenly a rolling mist that was coming off the surrounding fields. It hadn't been foggy or misty before, not until we passed that fatality, and even with high beams, it seemed like we were driving through thick pea soup mist. I saw a road sign that we had to basically stop to see. The name was not familiar at all. My friend's PT Cruiser said that we were going fine, but the road wasn't familiar. The mist kept rolling off the fields. No other cars were around, and we drove for over an hour and still stayed in the same area as it seemed, with winding roads and the mist rolling around us. It was starting to get very creepy. It didn't help that I had no internet coverage on my cell phone, so I text posted to Facebook and asked if anyone was up to please call me and bring up Google Maps so they could try and help us so that we could find out where we were, as we were very, very lost. A few minutes later, I get a call. We were driving very slowly, and I gave them the name of the road sign. They couldn't find it on the map. They even searched for it and nothing came up. The longer we spoke, the more the mist started to dissipate. Suddenly, when the mist cleared, we were in Rootstown. However, this made no sense at all, as to get there, we would have had to have gone under I-76, which is what we had been trying to do. We had been driving slow enough to catch sign reflections, and there were no signs for the 76. My friend on the phone said that there was no way we could have gotten there without going under the 76 or seeing exit or entrance ramps. Well, we did, and there were also now vehicles around us. We took a road through Rootstown 18 to Akron, and what did we pass in Rootstown? State troopers, a motorcycle on its side, and a body covered. When I tried to find information on the Newton Falls accident, I couldn't find anything in the following days, nor the accident that we saw in Rootstown. I have no idea what we might have entered, but I believe having someone call me managed to get us out of it. Number 2. During my last semester at college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 pounds, whilst I was a mere 120. Whilst unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After a 2-year relationship, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife bore me a son, and my son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him as well as my daughter. One day, though, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, inverted almost. It was still in 3D, just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs, and a white, square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it to the point that my wife got very concerned. That's when things started to happen. I didn't go to work. Something, I didn't know what, but something was not right with that lamp. I stopped eating. I only left the couch to use the bathroom at first. Soon, I stopped doing that too, as I wasn't eating nor drinking. I stared at that lamp for 3 days before my wife became extremely concerned. She had someone come over to try and talk to me. By this time though, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp was not real. My house was not real. My wife, my kids, none of it was real. The last 10 years of my life had not been real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up the entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and then I became aware of pain. A shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth." I opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I did not know. Lots of them were freaking out, and I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up and walked me across the sidewalk and into the grass and threw me face down into the back of a car. I was still disoriented. I was taken to the hospital by the cop, as it seemed he didn't want to wait for the ambulance driver. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving at the loss of my wife, my children, and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, and I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams, that I would blink, and I would wake up again in the reality that I once knew. I never have. But sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. I have no idea what happened. Could I have dreamt it all? Could you dream 10 years of a whole life? A person, moments shared, places gone, new experiences, new tastes, new smells. Can it all come from your mind? Really? I don't think so. But like I said, I have no explanation for what happened that day, and it still leaves me speechless. Number 3. This happened a couple of years ago in my neighborhood. An elderly neighbor thought that one of the strays that she regularly fed was in the backyard of a vacant house next to her backyard. I told her that I would go look, as she was very anxious about it and worried a lot of the time. I was on my cell phone, and she was on her home phone. The house next door to the vacant house had a radio on the garage. People were working on the car, Birds were chirping, and you could hear kids down the street. She's at her back door, and we can see each other as I walk along the side of the vacant house. I call the cat's name and saw nothing move, and was relaying this to her as I walked further into the backyard. But then all of a sudden, something happened. I could no longer hear the radio next door, nor the people, nor the children, nor the birds. The phone became very staticky, and when I looked over to her back door, it was like a mist. I could hardly see her. I yelled into the phone, "Can you hear me?" And in reply, a man's voice said, "Help me." I flew out of that backyard. I stopped a few houses up to catch my breath. I could hear the radio people and birds and kids again. The phone was no longer staticky. She said over the line, "What the hell was that?" I relayed what I had seen and heard, and asked her what she saw and if she had heard me. She told me that for a moment her vision was obscured, almost as if I were in a cloud, and she heard static on the phone. Then she heard the voice of a little girl. I asked if she was sure it was a little girl, and she said it was. Nothing has ever terrified me more than that. We have a 90-year-old neighbour, and has lived in this neighbourhood ever since it had been built. I went over and asked her if anything had happened in the backyard or in that house in general. She knew and had never heard of anything. I told her what happened, and she thought maybe it had something to do with the Indians that lived on this area several hundred years ago. There is no amount of money that would ever entice me to go into that yard again, and I shudder to even look at it. When the house was torn down, the neighbourhood shook more than for any other house. Number 4. I sold a car, but I didn't. When I was younger, I owned an old Falcon coupe, which I always meant to do up. But life got ahead of me as it does, and I sold it. I also kept in contact with the guy who bought it. We spoke for a while as he gradually worked on it, and got it looking pretty nice. Years later, when my parents were cleaning up their property out of town, my mother asked me what I wanted to do with my old coupe. That made no sense, and still doesn't, after telling her that if there's one on the property, it wasn't mine. When I went to visit them, sure enough, there's my old coupe, in the exact same state as when I had sold it, buried up to its axles in dirt, having sat there for more than a decade. All this time I'd regretted having to sell it, wishing I could find another one, because they were really rare, and apparently my memories of selling it come from a different universe, but the fact of selling it came from this one. I am absolutely certain I sold it to this guy. He also went to great length to tell me all the details and problems he had and all the new parts that he had to get imported to get it running again. I am absolutely certain I sold it to this guy, because we had such extensive conversations about the recovery process. Still freaks me out to this day. Number 5. Once, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was on a road trip with my family. We had had a wonderful vacation in Disney World for a week, and we were driving back home to Houston from Orlando. I'd fallen asleep in the back seat, and I have no idea how long I'd been asleep for. Whilst I was asleep, I remember having the most vivid dream of burning alive. It was so hot, and I felt the fire burning me alive. I could hear it crackling. I could hear a faint screaming. I could even smell and taste the smoke in my dreams. I awoke startled when my mum had to slam on the brakes pretty hard. I woke up sweaty and very anxious. There was something off, and I could just feel it in the pit of my stomach. I asked my mother why she slammed on the brakes, and she just said something about traffic starting randomly on the freeway. We were in a slow, bumper-to-bumper traffic jam for about 10 minutes, which was enough to let me catch my breath and reflect upon the dream I had just had, to tell my family what I'd seen. We came up to the place that defined why there was a random traffic incident. A car had slammed onto the pillar of the overpass and was entirely engulfed in flames. No ambulance, no fire truck, and no police had arrived yet. Just Samaritans pulled over trying to help whoever was inside. Immediately I knew they weren't alive, and I had just been experiencing what they were. I burst into tears. Never will I forget it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Shout out to Mr. Richards and Lynn's Reborn Nursery for today's topic recommendation. If you have a video topic for a future video that you'd like, just let me know in the comments section. You know, out of all these stories, the glitch of a 10-year dream gets to me the most. I can't imagine living a life and then waking up and all of it being a glitch and never happening. It's the creepiest thing by far. What did you guys think of these stories? Have any of you ever experienced something like it? I'd really love to know. As always, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and drop a comment if you can, as it really helps me out. Finally, feel free to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Mortis Media for updates and behind the scenes. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.